Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. We're going to talk today about how to ensure when you go to sell the practice that you've spent years building, what steps can you take? How can you ensure that you're going to be able to get the maximum value? And I'm delighted to have today David Grau Jr. David is the founder and CEO of the Succession Resource Group. And over the years, he's literally helped hundreds of advisors buy practices, sell practices, merge practices, do succession planning. He's an expert in this area. And I can tell you that anytime I write an article that has to do with any of those topics, David is one of my primary go-to guys because he's extremely knowledgeable. So, David, I'm very glad you're here and I thank you. Just some very quick housekeeping notes. David and I are going to chat for about 20 minutes, and then we'll leave 10 minutes for your questions. The recording of the webinar will go out to everyone who registered tomorrow. So I'm going to get that out tomorrow as soon as I get it. So without further ado, let's jump into our topic. So, David, the first question is, when we talk about building value in a practice, what are we talking about? How would you define value? How do you think about it?
Yeah, value is a funny topic because for most folks we talk to, I think when they talk about building value in the organization, it is
Hmm.
first cut at it is more revenue. And I think at this point, most folks in the industry, IBD, RIA, hybrid, duly registered, insurance agency, it doesn't really matter.
Hmm.
Everybody generally knows, I think, conceptually that recurring revenue has more value than commissionable revenue. I mean, you don't even need an
Hmm.
expert to tell you that. You just sort of intrinsically know it.
Hmm.
So when you start talking about value, for the most part, people are talking about the growth in the revenue of their practice, and they're talking about multiples of revenue, which are fine. They're great. We use them. We talk about them all the time. We publish them twice a year.
Yes.
But I mean, at its core, at the end of the day, value is also somewhat dependent on the thing that we're studying. Like the value of a toaster, for example, is objectively its value. Like I can go look and see
Hmm.
what these toasters are selling for. If it's a rare vintage
Hmm.
one, probably
Hmm.
find comps. Well, our industry is not terribly dissimilar in that we have comps. Like we help buy and sell, to your point,
Hmm.
150 deals per year on average. I mean, that's
Wow.
enough when you've been doing it for over a decade now to be able to compare of what a business like yours would generally sell for. It's
Hmm.
also somewhat size dependent. So if you've got, let's say, a RIA, I'll keep my example very simple. So fee only, 500,000 in fees. That practice in general, you talk about like the value, would be assessing its value really honestly based on its revenue, Mark. Like we
Hmm.
don't really
Okay.
care at 500,000 in revenue. I don't care whether you've got waterfalls in your lobby or you work out of your home office virtually.
Hmm.
Doesn't affect me as a hypothetical buyer, which is where
Hmm.
value comes from.
Hmm.
Your overhead doesn't affect me at that size because I'm going to take your 500,000 in revenue and fees and I'm going to drop it into my infrastructure.
Right.
Add a zero. Now we're talking 5 million in fees,
Hmm.
still value, but the value isn't as much about revenue or clients. It's now about profits and the business, the machine that you have built.
Hmm.
So it partly depends on the size. If we're talking, I think a fair
Hmm.
cutoff is probably 2 or 3 million in revenue and
Hmm.
below.
Hmm.
About value, thinking about it in terms of like the revenue and clients that you have.
Yes.
You get
Yes.
above 2 or 3 million, and that's whether you wanted it to be or not. That's starting to look a lot like a business. You got
Hmm.
people and you got office space and workflows and processes and annual
Hmm.
reviews, benefit programs. Like at that size, I don't care about your revenue anymore
Hmm.
because I can't pay the bills with revenue. I have profits. Like that's what's being bought
Hmm.
and sold at that larger size. So long answer for a short question. But when we think about value,
Hmm.
I mean, at its core, it's really back to what's being bought and sold, but that's not even a universal answer. Smaller
Hmm.
revenue, larger profits. And so the answer
Hmm.
could vary depending on the subject we're talking about.
Right. So I think if I'm understanding you properly, once you get above that 2 or 3 million, gross revenue level, then profitability becomes more of more of a consideration than pure gross
Yeah.
is really what you're saying.
100%. I mean, at its core, valuation, frankly, it's about an asset's ability to produce revenue or profits into the future. Like that
Mm-hmm.
really, regardless of who does it, the
Mm-hmm.
methodology, we got lots of smart valuation people. They will make it seem very complicated, and it is. But you
Mm-hmm.
back up and squint your eyes. At its core, it really isn't that complicated. To your point, Mark, it's either projected
Mm-hmm.
future revenues, that's what I'm
Right.
getting, or projected future profits. Like how we project and
Right.
how we discount back. Sure, there's lots of math involved in that, but the
Right.
core concepts are most folks understand them.
Okay. So that's no, that's a good way to think about it. So I guess one topic that I wanted to talk to you about because I'm sure it has an influence on value is growth. So what I was wondering is where, with advisory practices today, where does most of their growth in revenue come from?
Yeah, it's funny. So in a well-established advisory practice, one that's been around for a few years, they're not just starting out. Most
Mm-hmm.
of their new business is coming from either one of two things:
Mm-hmm.
market appreciation of the assets, which
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say generally doesn't really count. I mean, it's great.
Uh,
It's a good growth engine. I would take it if
right.
a part of our business is growth,
Right.
but that isn't something that advisory businesses, for the most part, can control unless you start getting really aggressive with the investments, and that could
Mm-hmm.
be some short-term growth. So
Right.
it is appreciation in the markets, and that is a component.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
it's referrals. It's organic growth. Either picking up maybe
Mm-hmm.
new assets from existing clients because you've done a good job with them, or
Mm-hmm.
getting referred new business. But like in terms of growth engines to grow and scale an enterprise in an industry that's now starting to see a fair amount of private equity starting to creep in
Mm-hmm.
at the edges and periphery,
Yes.
our growth sources that we see coming through in the valuations, which to be fair, Mark, is also a little bit of a tainted sample set. Like
Mm-hmm.
the folks doing evaluations are the folks who are going to be most focused on measuring the success of their enterprise, doing equity sharing, buying and selling
Mm-hmm.
businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And even those firms, the
Mm-hmm.
most common growth engines are market appreciation of the assets, new investable assets from existing clients, or referrals. And the referrals, when you ask them, like, well, how do you grow? Referrals are
Right.
the answer. And that to me, I'm
Right.
sorry, but like as nice as that is, and I'm great that advisors have that from the amazing client experience that they have implemented, it
Yes.
still is not something you have control over. It isn't trackable. It isn't scalable. It
Right.
frankly, I don't say it's not sustainable, but I would
Mm-hmm.
hate to see that as the sole growth engine for a business that I was investing in, for example.
Yes, and that's what I wanted to that's what I wanted to focus on. So
Yeah.
in a certain way, a business that's growing by market appreciation and the owner bringing in referrals,
Right.
there's a certain downside to that from what you're saying, right? Because it's not necessarily from a buyer standpoint, a predictable,
Yep.
repeatable event or events,
And
right?
I think the easiest way to highlight that, frankly, Mark, is the amount of
Mm-hmm.
times that we have heard, and maybe folks listening or that will listen to the recording of this
Mm-hmm.
also agree or know somebody who this is happening to. There's a lot of firms that they're very good at implementing a client experience, and that experience is good enough then to generate referrals, which is fantastic,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even more investable assets from the existing clients.
Mm-hmm.
Downside is when they get to doing the succession plan, they show up on our doorstep. We create this amazing, robust plan. The timeline works, the role transition
Mm-hmm.
works, but they come back
Mm-hmm.
and say, well, Mark, this is great. My concern is while you show they can afford it, I know they're really good, what we call farmers. They're really good at executing on the plan. They're really good at taking care of the clients or operations,
Mm-hmm.
but they can't grow
Mm-hmm.
the firm. So I'm worried the firm is going to sort of die on the vine here as they maintain what I've built, but then they can't continue to grow it in my absence. How do we solve for this? And my answer to that is, well, then you can't retire because you are not done yet. Like the big part
Right.
of succession planning, sure, is making sure that somebody could take care of the clients.
Right.
Part of it,
Right. Right.
but succession planning is about creating a sustainable enterprise. Servicing clients is definitely a critical component. Like if you can't do that job, it doesn't matter how many new clients we're bringing in, we're going to lose them out the back door just as fast.
Right. Right.
But then they stop there because the owners, in most cases, they haven't created a sustainable, transferable growth engine for that business. It all comes from relationships they have with, some great centers of influence that they've known forever, maybe their golf buddies, attorneys and stuff that
Hmm.
they've known and go skiing with,
Right.
which again
Right.
is fantastic while you're there. But what happens when you're not there?
Right. Right. So therefore, a business, I mean, really, what you're saying is a business whose revenues and growth are too dependent on a single owner, that there's actually a big downside to that from the standpoint of a prospective buyer. That's kind of
In an
not up,
industry where
kind of
so
not
many,
optimal.
yeah, I mean, you're
Hmm.
spot on. When you got so many folks who they hear what the industry average multiples are of
Hmm.
EBITDA, of top line revenue, it doesn't matter which one we're using. They hear
Hmm.
that, but then they, of course, want the highest and best value they can get. Understandably, we all will someday when we
Right.
sell our businesses.
Right.
Unfortunately, when you see the higher end multiples paid, you see these great deals being done, like,
Hmm.
especially if you get bigger with the private equity firms. But
Hmm.
it even happens, between peer to peer deals where you get a great value, great terms, but
Hmm.
those things only happen for the businesses that have been prepared for sale. And I tell you, that's the minority, unfortunately, Mark.
Hmm.
Everybody wants it, but very few have actually taken the time to really objectively stand back and figure out what is my business great at executing on and what is it not so great. And
Right.
sadly, the future growth engines of that firm, the marketing in many cases, it's an area where it hasn't hardly been invested in at all. And it's something that the next generation is basically supposed to figure out, but they
Hmm.
don't even know at that point really what it means to be a business owner, let alone how to do marketing in a business that's been established for 20 years that has not done any marketing.
Right. So let's focus on that a little
Yeah.
bit. So it sounds like having a having basically, kind of a repeatable, efficient, well, efficient isn't the right word, but a marketing system that works, that's something that could that greatly enhance the value of a practice or firm.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, growth is what most evaluators would hang their hat on. If you ask, like, what's consistently in like the top three value drivers for anybody evaluating effectively any business, frankly, and it would be growth.
Hmm. Hmm.
But growth grossly oversimplifies it. Like if you
Hmm.
showed up here, Mark, and said, well, evaluate my business, we grow by
Hmm.
25% per year. Well, that's
Hmm.
fantastic. But how does it grow by 25% per year? If you then tell me, like, well, I've got all these great relationships in the community, I'm not as excited about buying that because I'm
Right.
buying the business from Mark, and Mark is the reason that that growth happens. Well, Mark's going to retire.
Yeah, when he exits the scene,
Only
then
growth
then
can exit with the scene, and
yeah,
that's you're wanting me to pay for the growth, but then you don't have growth that I can actually keep when you go, and that's
exactly.
the power of marketing. And it's frankly, I would tell you, I think it's one of the few downsides to recurring revenue.
Hmm.
Not a lot of them, but one of the
Hmm.
few downsides is by the time you get that business built, and granted, small recurring revenue for the first client and the 10th client and the 30th client sucks. But by the
Right.
time you get to 100, 200 household, you got a pretty good
Hmm.
established base. You don't have to market
Right.
because you have fees and trails and
Of
12B1s,
course.
renewals, the list goes on. Even financial
Right.
planning fees now are starting to get to the point where they're charging them annually and doing those plans annually.
Hmm.
If I have recurring revenue every single year, it to some degree for some firms can get them to a point where on a marketing perspective, they're a little more complacent than they probably would be if they were still transactional, where you
Right.
might be in
We have to
business
go.
20 years, but really you've been in
Right.
business 1 year 20 times. Like
Right.
you can't afford to just sit around and wait for referrals. You do marketing. And it's
Right.
a big part of then when we ask firms, tell us about your staff. Like you want people who can grow the business. How many hunters do you have? Like how many people do you have that they dedicate at least half of their time
Hmm.
to maintaining and monitoring prospects of the organization, generating new prospects, new COIs.
Hmm.
Most of them don't have anybody who spends more than half of their time doing that unless they're a partner.
Right.
And if you don't
Right.
have anybody doing that, that kind of makes sense because why would you have somebody to follow up on prospects if you're not doing the marketing that generates the prospects? So you don't have the marketer, which then means you don't have anybody focused on cultivating your prospects.
Hmm.
So it's this chicken and egg problem effectively where people understand that they really should have somebody actively focusing on closing business, sourcing new
Right.
business.
Right.
but because they don't invest in the marketing side as heavily as they probably otherwise should to create sustainable
Mm-hmm.
growth,
Mm-hmm.
that they don't need that person. But if they spent the money on marketing, it would not be long before you need somebody to follow up on the leads that you're getting from all these various sources. So it's a little bit of a
Right.
catch-22 we're seeing.
Yeah. So how can an advisory firm, if they want to establish an ongoing, a successful ongoing marketing process, what do they need to do? Like what kind of person do they need to hire and what does that person need to do?
Well, and I would say, I mean, early on, it's going to suck. It's like hiring
Mm-hmm.
your first admin you hire, for example.
Mm-hmm.
First person you bring on, they don't add any value. I mean, I'm talking value with a lowercase v, but they don't add any value because the first 6 to 12 months, you bring this
Mm-hmm.
new admin person on to buy you some free time, take care of
Mm-hmm.
scheduling.
Mm-hmm.
You have to spend all this time training them and mentoring them, getting them to a place where they know how to talk to your clients the way that you want those clients being talked to.
Right.
And you look at it and you're like, well, the whole first year I paid $60,000 for this person and it made me less efficient. But it's year
Right.
2 and year 3 where you start to see the return. Marketing is the same way in my mind that yes, initially, what do most firms need? They just need sort of a jack of all trades. I need somebody
Mm-hmm.
who's probably, I don't know, they're going to be 60 to maybe $80,000 a year to get somebody in as just
Right.
like we'll call them a marketing specialist. Basically,
Mm-hmm.
somebody who can do a little bit of everything. They can do a little bit of actual like, marketing, email, social media. They can do a little bit of
Right.
design, a little bit of branding work.
Mm-hmm.
Again, granted, when you have quadrupled in size,
Mm-hmm.
will have to narrow their role, or you may have to move things around a bit and get
Mm-hmm.
specialists instead of a
Mm-hmm.
generalist. But early on, folks need a generalist, and generalists are usually a little bit cheaper. And
Right.
their job basically is to work alongside the owner and figure out what can we do around the brand, what can we do about the outbound reach. Again,
Right.
some of your traditional marketing tactics, your client testimonials, things like that can be a little trickier for the advisor space with
Mm-hmm.
compliance.
Right.
But because there's some compliance headaches and hoops to jump through, a lot of folks just
Mm-hmm.
throw in the towel like, marketing's, you can't do it in our industry. Well, it's not easy. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But marketing's
Mm-hmm.
not easy anyway.
Right. No, it isn't. It isn't.
And there's firms out
It,
there, frankly, that will help you jumpstart some of this stuff, like Proudmouth, great group. If you want to just start with like the podcast as a tool, for example, well,
mm-hmm.
they'll make that stuff turnkey. Just hit the easy button, pay them once a month. They'll help you generate the content. They'll help you market it.
Mm-hmm.
It's great.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Holleran's group, we love them. They do good work.
Mm-hmm.
You got what FMG Suite is out there. They've got a ton of resources and tools. You got firms
Mm-hmm.
like Asset Mark that are out there that want to help their
Mm-hmm.
advisors. I saw them doing marketing boot camps recently. Like
I
that
see.
never happened 10 years ago. There was no marketing
Mm-hmm.
boot camp.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's been interesting to see it, but we're starting to see resources aimed in and around this topic.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to be a major support factor to help get more succession planning taking place where we see it talked about a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but not a lot of people actually implement the succession plan that they thought they wanted. And I tell you, in most cases, it's because they're concerned. If they take their foot off the gas, there's nobody else that's going to put their foot on it.
Right. And I guess if you hire a marketing generalist, if you start with a marketing generalist, then you have a repeatable process whereby when the owner leaves, you have an organized way where new prospects and new clients are going to be can come in. So that's no, I see how that's really. Is there a certain size that in either gross or AUM that a firm needs to reach to be able to even afford a generalist?
Man,
I guess that's
that
a
one's
tough
tough.
question.
It's tough only because I know where the industry is at and I know
Right.
where they should be objectively as small businesses.
Hmm.
It should probably be the third or fourth hire for most folks.
Right. Right. Because that's how
Like
critically, yeah.
basically you're asking like at what point would you hire somebody to help your firm grow faster?
Right.
Well, day one, like
Yeah.
I would hire a marketing specialist and say, for a little while, the phones aren't going to be ringing a lot, but when they do ring, you need to pick those up too, because that has got to be an early hire position. Like I want somebody focused on building my brand in the community at all times.
Right.
Period. Like,
No, so no, that's a great point. It reminds me, I once sat next to someone at a conference, and he said to me, when an advisor tells me that they grow their business by referrals only, that means they have no marketing program.
Yep.
And that's kind of that's really kind of what you're saying, and I think that's a very important point. We had spoken privately before the call. We were talking a little bit about the CEO model,
Hmm.
and I wonder if you could explain what that is and talk about how that influences the value of a firm.
Yeah, it's funny. So we talk a lot about and are proponents for firms that want to get there, which I fully
Hmm.
acknowledge. There are firms that
Hmm.
want to be a business, they want to have an enterprise that can someday exist without them. And then
Hmm.
there are the lifestyle practices that the business will never exist without them. Kind of by design.
Right,
They're going to keep it simple,
right.
lean and mean. And both of those can be very efficient and incredibly valuable. It's
Hmm.
everything in between those two goalposts where you have problems, where you are
Hmm.
not lean, mean, and super efficient. You're on your
Hmm.
path towards being a scalable enterprise,
Hmm.
but maybe that isn't actually your goal. You just knew you wanted to do more than being a lifestyle practice. They end up in this kind of gray area,
Hmm.
which gets back to the question of, well, when you're the simple lifestyle practice, you are chief cook and dishwasher. You know it, you own it, you are great at doing it all,
Hmm.
but you can only do so much of it. So
Right,
you're never going to scale this thing to being, million, 2 million in revenue and beyond as a lifestyle practice.
right.
But you own it, you love it, and you make a great living. Frankly, you in many cases can take more home net of taxes, debt service than firms 3 to 4 times your size
Hmm.
because you are so
Hmm.
darn efficient.
Right, and lean.
And you're lean. But then you can get
Right.
to the larger sizes, boy, and it's not even size specific, but it does take a little bit of size, to get to that enterprise
Hmm.
level because you need people to do the work.
Hmm.
But those are the
Hmm.
folks who are intentionally building to no longer be an owner operator. Like they are building a true business that could exist without them.
Hmm.
That's the advisor to CEO shift. And frankly, I would tell you, I mean, from the
Hmm.
work you do, Mark, on the recruiting side, I think
Hmm.
there's probably two really, really hard transitions most folks make. Maybe three if you include retiring from the business, which is
Hmm.
fair. First one
Hmm.
is leaving wherever it is you started to go independent. Most
Right,
folks don't start an advisory business as an independent practitioner.
right,
They start somewhere, fill in the blank,
right.
some firm that does the training and mentorship and get you licensed. And then eventually they
Warehouse,
leave and they
whatever.
go independent. Like that's a
Right,
big jump.
right.
The other hard transition is the advisor to CEO.
Hmm.
Because you think all that time at the wirehouse or the bank or the trust company, wherever you started, cut your teeth, you decided to go independent years later, however many years that is, will be your part of your story.
Hmm.
But then you get to being an independent advisor. Well, you're
Hmm.
still an advisor like 90% of the time, CEO 10% of the time.
Right.
Then you got your CFP, Series 7, Series 24, 6,
Hmm.
23, 1 in some cases. Like you get
Hmm.
all this training as an advisor and they build up this business and they get to the 2 or 3 million threshold and they've got staff, people that they've been training, benefits. They might be looking to hire like an office manager. They look around and realize, well, shoot, this isn't a practice anymore. I actually stumbled into a business. And I'm not sure that
Hmm.
I want to be in charge of a business. And then
Hmm.
they decide I'm going to commit to this or not. But when they do commit to it, that's then when they have to shift and decide I will become over time the CEO. I will get out of
Right.
client facing activities because when you start thinking about your highest and best use of time,
Hmm.
I mean, in most cases, for most advisors, they have a junior advisor on their team. Like they have already demonstrated they have the ability to mentor and train and sort of create a little mini me version of themselves.
Hmm.
And over time, time in the saddle, they can go from taking really good care of like C and D clients to maybe even taking pretty good care of your B clients. Well, with enough time or just investing in it, you could hire somebody to service your A clients. Like
Hmm.
that is possible. Like, could you hire somebody from the outside to come in and be the CEO and run your firm?
Hmm.
Maybe, but that's going to be a tall order to find somebody. Like, you need a
Right,
really good recruiter and a hell of a lot of luck. How
right.
hard would it be to find somebody who is a really good farmer? Like, they could take amazing care of your A clients with,
Yeah,
6 to 12 months of tutelage. Like,
sure, you can get
it
those
won't be
people.
cheap, but you
Right,
could do it. Like, you could hire
right.
it. And let's just say, go to the extreme. Let's say it was $300,000. Like you're in New York, Mark, nothing's cheap there. But you were in New York. You're not now.
I was
If you're in
for
New York
many
or
years.
California, if we got in California,
Sure,
let's
but
since
it's
things are
expensive.
recorded,
Yes.
it's expensive. Let's say it cost you $300,000. to get
Mm-hmm.
somebody like off the shelf, they could show up day one. And once
Mm-hmm.
they knew your processes and your client
Mm-hmm.
dossier, like about your clients,
Mm-hmm.
they could take good care of your clients, like with minimal input from you. That costs you 300 grand. That's $150 an hour, like ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
So the
Right.
question we put to a lot of advisors is, if
Mm-hmm.
you could go hire that person, let's just say you made that decision. Yep.
Right.
It sucks paying the 300,000. I get it. However, you now have 40 hours at least back. Could you
Mm-hmm.
generate more than $150 per hour value if
Mm-hmm.
you had 40 weeks per year, 52 weeks a year made available?
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge there is, objectively, the answer is generally yes. But qualitatively, the hard part is you get a lot of folks, I mean, including myself years ago, where you're like, well, that sounds great, but what exactly does a CEO do full time? Like,
Exactly. Exactly. Right. So what kinds of things does an advisor as a CEO, advisor as CEO, once they evolve to that role, what kinds of things do they focus on typically?
and it is funny because I've done enough of these presentations over the years where we've talked about this, sort of building an
Mm-hmm.
enterprise as opposed to building a
Mm-hmm.
practice or a lifestyle practice. And you get folks who
Mm-hmm.
will come back and say, you know what? I made the transition a couple of years ago. I heard you talk about it. And then they start describing like what their future state now looks like. And 201, nobody could envision the alternative scenario where they went back and spent time sitting in front of clients
Mm-hmm.
because all of a sudden they can focus on things like marketing and building a
Mm-hmm.
business development team,
Right.
your client service team, but a few of the folks who are really seem like they're good at it, they got the propensity to do close
Mm-hmm.
business, maybe.
Right.
Maybe not
Right.
like you did, but they could do it with the right tutelage.
Mm-hmm.
We start
Mm-hmm.
having those folks following up on the prospects. We start looking at our workflows for that. We start working on the radio
Mm-hmm.
show, more centers of influence. We figure out,
Mm-hmm.
how can I make myself irrelevant in this business? And it ain't going to happen today or tomorrow. It'll
Right.
probably take years. But
Right.
if they can make their focus on what is our strategy for the year, what are our projections for the next 5, and just looking at just the next year, if our growth goal is 20, 25%, how are we going to do that?
Right, right. And so the
So,
CEO is really focusing really on growth and probably on the client service or the client experience,
yeah,
like everything, because that generates referrals. I mean,
right.
just to make sure the firm is growing and that it's a sustainable ongoing kind of growth. So let me check out some questions now because we're kind
Yeah.
of like bumping up on top of the or the bottom the bottom of the hour. Um, I guess here's one. So in the CEO model, you haven't just have a ballpark idea like what percentage of industry firms operate that way? Is it only a handful of gigantic firms at this point?
To your point, it is certainly all of the gigantic firms. I mean, but
Right.
redefine gigantic. I mean, that's all relative. I would say by the time you get to even half a billion and above, it's like 500
Mm-hmm.
million in total AUM for the team. In
Mm-hmm.
most cases, whether you meant to have it happen or not, like to get to that size, you're
Yes.
going to have a tough time still sitting in front of clients. You're going to have a tough time doing anything besides leading that organization. Like just it kind of happens to you by default because there's too much other stuff pulling
Right.
at your time. They can buy themselves a little bit of extra runway and still kind of hide behind the client meetings a little bit because it's safe. It's what we're good at. It's what we know.
Mm-hmm.
They can buy themselves a little bit of time there if they
Mm-hmm.
hire like a COO and then
Right.
basically it's like, well, I've come up with the strategy. You go figure everything else out. Like, well, a good starting place.
Mm-hmm.
But to answer your direct question on you, what percentage?
Mm-hmm.
Undoubtedly, it's going to be a smaller percentage because I mean, there's
Right.
probably like 30% that are doing less than a few hundred thousand in annual revenue. I get it. At that size, you're not going to be a CEO not seeing clients. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But you are definitely seeing the top end firms have always been doing this. I mean, multiple billions, they've always been doing this.
Mm-hmm.
You're starting
Right.
to see those attributes mimicked by firms much, much further downstream. I mean, you're seeing firms now consistently with 2 and 3 million in revenue and above that are starting to adopt this. Now, again, it's gradual. They probably still spend
Mm-hmm.
30% of their time seeing clients,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but mostly it's because they have to kind of gradually ease into this, as in, like, it's still a little bit of a cutting edge topic. It's not bleeding edge anymore in our industry,
Right.
but I'd still
Right.
put it cutting edge. Like, they
right.
like the idea, they can see the merits of it, and so they're just kind of putting their toe in the water and doing it gradually, which makes a ton of sense. And it won't take long for most of these folks to see, like, all right, when I get down to having 70% of my time free, I could do a lot. Imagine if I had that other 30% free. Like, I'll use my
Yeah.
70% I have now to get some more people trained up so I can hand those relationships off and have then in 12 months all of my time free to lead this organization.
Well, that makes sense because probably more and more people are starting to recognize that CEO, that an advisor and CEO is something that's going to add tremendous value to their firm. So it makes sense that it's kind of trickling down. Let me just take another question here.
Yeah.
So this question is asking if you're going to hire a marketer, right? Which you mentioned is a key early hire, and a generalist sounds like a good way to go. Do you look for someone who's doing that now, or what kind of background might you look for? So-
So the nice thing is there are there's a lot of people out there that would call themselves marketers. The trick is then
Mhm,
obviously figuring out
mhm,
there are a lot of marketers, but they're going to come from larger institutions and organizations where not only
mhm,
were they the social media guy or gal, they were the
mhm,
person who created the content for the social media, and not just for social media, but for their Instagram account at that company.
mhm.
That does you no good. Like, to get somebody who can generate content for Instagram is utterly useless because that's not how you're going to reach your clients. Number one. Number two, I need somebody who not just knows how to create the content, but that can actually go post said content and measure the results. Like,
Right,
so you have to be
right.
really careful. The nice thing is there are folks who are specialists and there are folks who are generalists. There's not a lot of room in between,
Mhm,
which is kind of
mhm,
nice. Um,
mhm.
for a lot of folks, like a nice way to put your toe in the water is to hire a marketing generalist. You look in again if you're going to hire local because you all are still in the office, for example. You
Yes,
use Indeed, you use LinkedIn. There are job descriptions
right,
out there for marketing generalists. The hardest part of the entire process is marrying their ideas with yours and compliance.
right. Well,
Marketers have lots
compliance
of good
is
ideas,
it's
but
always a
compliance is a wet
challenge.
blanket on top of it. So, but it doesn't take.
Right.
It's why it's tough to outsource. Like folks who have tried to use Upwork and some of these like virtual
Yes,
solutions, you need to
yes,
get somebody in so that in 12 to 24 months they've asked most of the questions and they've gotten the answers. So they understand the compliance, yeses and nos, not on everything. They don't need to be an expert,
right,
but they know
right.
enough to be dangerous and they know enough to not ask the same question more than once or twice. And that's why it's worth actually investing in and getting on payroll or get somebody like intentionally, like it's
Mm-hmm.
intention.ly. They're
Oh,
a marketing organization, like external fractional CMO for
oh,
advisors.
interesting.
So the solution
Mm-hmm.
you're starting to see pop up there now. But I mean, I tell you, Mark, I've been to conferences and exhibit halls for the better part of 2
Mm-hmm.
decades in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only now just starting to see anything marketing related in those exhibit halls. I'll bet you 5 years from now, they have a major section, kind of like technology.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but that's a good point that marketing is a broad term. The people have to understand what the person is actually doing. And I guess I would say as a recruiter, you always want to try to get some kind of demonstrated history of
Right.
success, that they weren't just kind of taking up space, that they actually accomplished something.
Right. And
So
with
that's
marketers, making sure what they accomplish is something that is actually measurable and that you care about.
right.
It's again
Because
like, oh,
measurement
we got
is so
we got a
important
million
in marketing.
impressions on our website. Like,
Hmm.
okay, I have yet to see a spot where I could pay any of my bills with impressions from a website. Like,
Right,
can you generate leads or have you demonstrated the ability to create funnels to generate and track leads? When they can do those things, when
right,
they have a great
right.
design portfolio where they can help you represent your brand better and more consistently, that's something we can hang our hat on. Like, again, do they have
Right.
to be experts in all these areas? No. As long as you know as the CEO what it is you want and have a little bit of free time to sort of check in on them and make sure that you're getting from them what you need when you need it,
Hmm.
that's better than nothing. And frankly, it doesn't take a lot to stand out from your peers because most of them are not spending a lot of money on marketing. They will be, but by the time they
Right,
do, you all listening can be much further ahead in the curve, which is nice.
right. No, that's a great point. I think we're pretty much out of time. Is there anything we didn't cover that might be especially important because you gave us a lot of really, a lot of really great information.
I think it's more about whether you're in the market for buying or selling or just operating an efficient business. It's just figuring out what it is future state that you aspire to have built. If that
Mm-hmm.
is that lean, mean lifestyle practice, you're going to make a ton of money and profits, not have to work your
Mm-hmm.
tail off,
Mm-hmm.
then own that. And that is your goal up until 60, 65, 70, whenever you want to retire.
Right.
Know that that's what I'm going to focus on building. I will not
Right.
overcomplicate my life. If there's a chance to grow
Mm-hmm.
faster, I get it. I don't want the complications. And
Right.
just own that and be wickedly efficient. And just know you're never going to make 4 or 5 million in top line revenue,
Right.
but you might be able to squeeze more out the bottom than firms 2 and 3 times your size. So just enjoy that, or go the other way with it and be the empire builder, but set your sights on having that empire, whether that's a billion or 10 billion, I don't care. And then know that you're going to have the time freed up at some point to figure out how do we get from point A to point B. And if you're sitting in front of
Right.
clients for, a couple hours every single week, there's no way that you can scale that organization while servicing clients and be able to build an amazing client experience
Right.
while you're executing on the client experience. It's kind of that like forest through the trees thing. It becomes really challenging. And so if you're going to build the enterprise and empire, that's
Mm-hmm.
fine. It'll take time to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's your goal, then own it and make sure you do everything in your power to get there. And if you fall short, that's not a bad thing.
Right.
It's the folks
Right.
who don't have the strategy. They've outgrown the lifestyle, but they don't desire to be a CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get stuck in this position where you get picked off by the aggregators and the recruiting companies because you just kind of get stuck. Get to like a
Mm-hmm.
million or 2 million in revenue. It's not fun anymore. You're getting pulled in a million different directions. You're not doing the part of the job that you really love doing anymore. And you can't figure out how you get out of it because you have to hire more people, which sounds like a terrible idea. So just
Mm-hmm.
don't get caught in the middle.
Right. So it's a matter of knowing who you are, what you want, and making sure you formulate the right strategy to get there. That's the
Yeah.
key. And you gave us, and I think, I want to thank you, David. I think you gave us some really thought-provoking information that's going to be very new to, I think, most of our listeners in terms of, what you mentioned about hiring a marketer and evolving into advisory CEO roles. So you gave us a lot of great information in a very short period of time. And I thank you very much. Thank you for being here and thank you for sharing.
Yeah, pleasure as always. And yeah, I hope everyone who either listens to it live or the recording gets value out of this. And obviously, if they want to go, a little bit deeper on this stuff, frankly, Mark, you're a great resource because you've read all of our stuff and everybody else's stuff on
Right.
this subject. And they can always reach out to us. They can hit the website or call.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. Thank you,
Appreciate it.
everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye. Thank you, David.